Chapter 368 of Berserk opened a huge can of worms that I'm still trying to process in my head. But among the many questions, one keeps rising to the surface time and time again. That being, what exactly are these specters/dark spirits? In Skull Knight's dialogue, he stated, "A flaring light illuminates the land this night. It is a wedge, cleaving the isle asunder. These beings, risen from the rift, are what you would call the very foundations of the island, the original masters of this place." Now, what does Skull Knight mean by this statement, and what possible conclusions can we draw from it? Let's start off with the island itself. We know that it's divided between quote-unquote light and bloom of the Queen's domain and the heavy and gloom of the Dwarf's domain. Therefore, there is a natural balance on the island. In fact, when Morta took Shirka to the dark caverns of the island, the young witch noted that it resembled Quathoth. Now, this is an interesting detail. In chapter 220, Slan remarked that Quathoth is the uterus of darkness, the vicinity of the netherworld where abominable spirits take ethereal form. It can spew forth any number of these children, like worms. The key phrase I want you to focus on is abominable spirits take an ethereal form. We've seen dark, amorphous spirits all throughout Berserk. They seem to be this all-pervasive substance that give form to the apostles and the God Hand members alike. Negative emotions give them vitality, and when there's a huge congregation of people with the same negative thoughts, they grow and multiply. They become a truly dangerous force that strips away humans of all their humanity. But not only can these abominable spirits take an ethereal form, with a large concentration of swirling negative emotions, it can also take an ethereal form when a certain person is filled with enough negativity within themselves. We saw this occur when Guts saw the physical manifestation of his internal beast of darkness. This really becomes interesting because when you look at the original incarnation of this creature, it was a conglomeration of many dark spirits joined together. It wasn't one single dark spirit, it was an amalgamation. But as Guts has continued to give in to his vices, i.e. his rage and anger, the spirit begins to grow, it gets stronger, and it takes on a more distinct form. Yet, at the end of the day, it is still a dark spirit of the astral realm that exists within our hearts. It cannot take a physical form unless a Baelid is activated and a sacrifice is made. However, there may be an exception to this rule, an exception that has been in plain sight all this time: Guts' Berserker Armor. This is where we go back to Shirka and Morta when they entered the region of Elfhelm that looked like Quathoth. And if you remember, Quathoth is a place that intersects with the physical realm and gives dark creatures ethereal bodies. Now on Elfhelm, the place that looks like Quathoth is the place where dwarfs live. Dwarfs like Hannar. As he puts it, it's the bowels of earth. Now because Hannar is a resident of this domain and has built the Berserker Armor, one has to wonder what materials he used to construct that armor. And I believe the clue is right here, and it's always been right here. If you go back throughout the manga, you'll see that Mira has left this clue for us to figure out for ourselves. But as far as I can tell, not many people have picked up on it, and in fact, I just picked up on it recently myself. Now, each time Guts dons the Berserker Armor, he is not only devoured by the armor itself, but he's also devoured by a dark spirit that looks remarkably similar to the spirits that devoured Elfhelm, and the spirits that devoured the Tower of Conviction at Albion. What I'm saying here is that Hannar has found a way to restrain the dark spirits within the armor itself. That's a pretty crazy notion when you think about it. But as we know, if the spirits weren't restrained, they would devour Guts' flesh within seconds, as we saw most recently in the events of chapter 368. However, just because these spirits are contained within the armor, they still carry the potential of consuming him if he loses all control. And I quote, "It's an omen. Each time you wear the armor and fight as the Berserker, light, voice, warmth, you will come to lose many things. The OD that dwells in that armor is as a flame, which never dies out, even once contained." Interesting choice of word there, by the way. "The coals yet smolder. Given the chance, it will explode into a hellfire. Even with an applied talisman, never make light of it. If you wish to continue existing as a human, that is." The part of this statement concerning the contained flame, as it were, indicates to me that Hannar infused the armor with the dark spirits/specters, and they feed off of the emotions of its owner. The stronger the emotions, the more powerful the user becomes, but at the same time, the greater the risk to their life. Essentially, the dark spirits on their own are like an instantaneous poison on humans. But once contained, they only become a mild poison that eradicates the user's life force over a period of time, given how angry or how emotional they get. For example, after using the Berserker Armor for the first time, a portion of Guts' hair turned white, indicating premature aging. After fighting the Sea God, Guts noticed that his vision had faded and become blurred. As we know, after the events of the eclipse, he already existed within the interstice. But it seems with each battle with the Berserker Armor, he becomes that much closer to death, and that much closer to the astral realm. Now, of course, if we're going to talk about Hannar and the dark spirits, we have to mention the fifth elemental in Berserk, Barites. Now, we know about the common four elementals, wind, fire, water, and earth. But the fifth one, Barites, is the all-connecting elemental. It's so tiny that not even the mages can see it. However, it connects everything. And it seems to have a very powerful force on not only the physical world, in terms of weight, but also the astral world. What do I mean by this? In chapter 346, Gedfring said, a Barite is so small you can't even scry it. Now, scry means that you can predict the future on something. Now, if you can't predict the future on it, it almost means that it's following its own sort of laws, its own sort of causality, if you will. So do the Barites make causality flow? And is that why causality is unpredictable and unavoidable in a lot of ways? Maybe so. Continuing on, but when gathered together, they make objects heavy, darken the sky, and produce things like depression and obsession in the mind. Now, we know that Griffith had the obsession of attaining the kingdom, so we would imagine that he had a lot of Barites welling up within his body. And then the fact that he was sent down to the Tower of Rebirth, and he was tortured, and his tongue was taken out, and all his tendons were cut, would mean that he probably got very depressed, especially when he knew that the dream was dead. And the climactic moment happened when he broke his arm and he was sitting in that lake laughing in a crazy manner. He had the perfect combination of maximum obsession and maximum depression all in one, which is what brought about the eclipse. And Hannar took these dark spirits, which are most likely Barites, put them in the Berserker Armor somehow, some way, in a form where they're actually visible, which means that there must be a huge concentration within that armor, and then they feed off of Guts' anger and rage and give him extra human strength and power. It's sort of interesting. It's like the Berserker Armor almost takes the Barites' abilities, and instead of manifesting it inward, it reverses the process. It manifests it outward through the armor, giving Guts all these special abilities. It may also explain why the idea of evil is surrounded by this swirling mass of darkness, by these souls, and why it may be at the center of the highest point of Barites, and why it may even mimic gravity in a way. You know how the heavier an object is, the higher its gravity is, and because of that, it warps space-time and causes other objects to be pulled into it. Now, on Elfhelm, it's kind of interesting because they don't have Barites on the surface. Hence the reason Isidro was able to jump up to a tree like he was weightless. And we know on Elfhelm that time flows differently. So it almost seems like not only do the Barites affect weight, they may also affect time as well. The less Barites, the less time flows. The more Barites, the more time flows. Of course, this is a lot of speculation, so it's hard to say whether or not this is right or wrong. It's basically headcanon at this point. I do want to give a brief shout out to SkullKnight.com. They kind of gave me the inspiration behind the whole idea of the Barites and the gravity effects that it may have in the world of Berserk. So shout out to SkullKnight.com. But anyway, moving on. Now, the reason I believe the armor is infused with these dark spirits is because the spirits did not attack Guts while he was wearing the armor. They tried to attack Isidro, they successfully attacked Roderick's crew, but in the presence of Guts, they merely asked him a question: sacrifice. This indicates to me that the spirits recognize the armor as one of their own, as it were, just as they recognized Griffith as one of their own and didn't attack him. And when the dark spirits were invading every corner of Albion and the Tower of Conviction, they avoided the presence of the demon child, as we saw protect Casca when she was in the Iron Maiden. Now, when Donnan fell to the ground in chapter 367, she stated, "Everything will break apart. We we are in danger. A rising tide from the depths of the earth comes. Now, she's referring to the spirits as a rising tide. And if you watched my previous video about the sword of actuation, i.e. the Yobimizu no Tsurugi, you know that the astral realm is similar to water. Therefore, these dark, amorphous spirits represent water. What am I exactly saying here? Remember when Guts was fighting the various monsters at the sea and he said this? The roar of the sea. It swells blackly from the expanse of the dark night. It draws me down to the deep seabed, a booming like roar. Now, Guts wasn't literally being drawn into the sea. He was using it as a metaphor to describe the experience of being consumed by the dark spirits of the Berserker Armor. And again, before he said this, we see the dark spirits consuming his arm. Now, as Guts lost all control of his consciousness, he was eventually stopped by the Moonlight Boy. The boy placed his hand on the armor. He glowed brilliantly, and he broke Guts free of the armor's influence, of the dark spirit's influence. And after this event occurred, we see Guts existing within an ocean of darkness, spirits floating around him everywhere. And I'll be damned if these spirits don't look similar to the ones we saw on Albion and on Elfhelm. So what this confirms to me is that not only are the spirits imbued within the armor, but the armor mimics the experience of the astral realm, which is one and the same with water. Essentially, it's like a pseudo-apostle process. It gives Guts a brief glimpse at being an apostle, just so he can harness that extra strength and speed so he can defeat his adversaries. But if he gives in too much, that semi-experience could consume him completely, just as it did to the Skull Knight. It's also very interesting to note that the helmet on top of the armor is originally a skull. It is that of death, indicating that it is part of the astral realm. It contains death. It contains dark spirits that consume people's flesh. And it's also an omen of what could become of the user if they're not careful. He'll have to find a way to walk on the water. He'll have to find a way to create a harmony with the water. Does this mean that Guts will become the proverbial Christ-like archetype through his trials and tribulations with the Berserker Armor? I'm not quite sure, but I do have some pieces of evidence that might point towards that conclusion. In Quothoth, Guts received an astral wound from Slan that went horizontally across his back and chest. Now, this is speculation, but what if Griffith were to give him a vertical wound that would intersect the horizontal wound, creating a cross? With the darkness consuming his body and the astral wounds creating the cross, he could, perhaps, control the darkness, create a balance. Something that Griffith has not been able to do. Something that Skull Knight has not been able to do. Skull Knight was consumed by the darkness. Griffith has separated light and darkness. He is both Griffith and Femto. But Guts has the potential of taking both the dark and the light and making them one. And not only would this allow him to fight monsters in the physical realm, he could fight monsters in the astral realm. This might allow him to kill Griffith. This might allow him to kill the dark spirits and restore some balance to the world. Perhaps the reason that Hannar created the armor in the first place was not only to give the user a boost in energy and strength, but to find someone with a strong enough will to not be consumed by that darkness. So many people get consumed by darkness and give into it, give into their lust and their ambitions. They take the chance at being an apostle and let go of their humanity, as did Griffith and many apostles before him. Skull Knight, unfortunately, could not contain himself, and he allowed his ego to be submerged by the darkness, only to be saved by Flora. But what if Guts is finally able to tame that darkness? What if he makes it his pet, something that he can harness and control whenever need be? Is this the conclusion that Miro was going for? I'm not really sure, guys, but I can tell you one thing for sure. I 100% believe that Hannar put dark spirits in that Berserker armor. I don't think I can be convinced otherwise at this point.
Battle not with monsters, lest ye become a monster.
Yeah.
And if you gaze into the abyss gazes also into you.
Right. But I would say, bring it on. If you gaze into the abyss long enough, you see the light, not the darkness.
Are you sure about that?
I'm betting my life on it.